can go. Great. Ooh. Hold on, let me make sure I did not skip pages. Yep, okay, here we go.
All right, thank you. So I just want to go over a little bit. Today we are conducting our meeting on WebEx, and so we're just going to go over a little bit of instructions on WebEx. You can manage your settings on your icons on the bottom part of your screen. There's a mute, unmute, you can turn your camera on, you can turn your camera off, and then you can leave the meeting. You are all, if we have time for questions and you have a question, you can raise your hand, which is, you can see the little smiley face hand icon right there on the bottom of your screen. So you can raise your hand and then we will ask you to unmute yourself when it's time to ask the question, but then we will go in once you have asked your question and we will mute you as well. So that is the basics for WebEx. It's pretty intuitive with the little icons on the bottom of your screen. Next slide, please, Sarah. Okay, so for those of you who are joining us on the phone, I'm going to go ahead and read the dial-in attendees slide here. Once the meeting starts, if you have a question, press *3 to raise your hand. Once you have raised your hand, you'll hear the prompt, "You have raised your hand to ask a question. Please wait to speak until the host calls on you." So once we call on you, you can talk. To hear a list of commands available during your meeting or the event, you press ***. And if you no longer want to ask your question or we've already called on you, then you press *3 to lower your hand. And you will hear the message say, "You have lowered your hand." All right, next slide, Sarah. All right, just a couple more housekeeping ground rules here. Attendees are asked to adhere to our Surveillance Public Meeting Code of Conduct, which is to be respectful of diverse opinions and experiences, be an active listener during our presentations, and anyone exhibiting disruptive behavior, intimidation, or aggression may be muted. And if you are muted, you will be asked to provide your comment online or by letter, so you'll still be able to submit your comments. Please keep your comments as brief as possible and related to the technologies in focus today, so that way we can allow everyone the opportunity to speak. Next slide, please.
All right.
And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. So just to level set a little bit, we are here to talk about some of the retroactive technologies here at the City of Seattle. Here at the city, our ordinance defines surveillance technologies as technologies that observe, analyze movements, behavior, actions of identifiable individuals in a way that is reasonably likely to raise concerns around civil liberties. There are certain exemptions that are part of the law, things like police body cameras, technologies for everyday office use. And so we are not here to talk about those today. We are talking about some very specific Group 4A technologies. Again, this recording and the slide deck that we're presenting here today will be made available on our public-facing website after this meeting, where you will also find a link either in this deck or on our website to the public comment submission form to submit public comments. You can always send it the old-fashioned way, if you will, via snail mail to this address. And that's an appropriate way to comment as well. All right, so here we go. Just a rough agenda. I'm about to hand it off to our colleagues at SPD to present on these technologies, which are here to discuss 4A, which are camera systems, tracking devices, remotely operated vehicles or ROVs, GeoTime, computer, cell phone, and mobile device extraction tools, and crash data retrieval. After the presentation, we are hoping to have time for some engagement and some points of clarification if there are any with you all by way of raising hands like Megan mentioned. You are free to put questions in the chat and we will address those as well after the presentation. All right. So just a note that we have here for additional comments unrelated to the specific technologies we're talking about today. You can always contact your council member. And if you have any additional follow-up questions, there's a way to also contact SPD for more information. All right. And with that, I will hand it over to Captain Britt.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all today. I appreciate those that have joined us and are listening in, and hopefully brought some wonderful questions that we can address. My name is Jim Britt. I'm a captain with the Seattle Police Department. My assignment is related to technology integration. So my job is to ensure that the Seattle Police Department is using technology effectively and appropriately, and doing so in a manner that makes sure that we ensure the public's trust in how we use it. And I know that it's a tall order, but it's something that I think we can get to. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please, Sarah. Thank you. As we always start with the mission of the Seattle Police Department is to prevent crime, enforce the law, and support quality public safety by delivering respectful, professional, and dependable police services. I want to get right into most of the technologies that we're dealing with here because I know that there will be some questions in the end. So if we can go right to the next slide, we'll get right into it. The first technology we're talking about are camera systems. Much like the audio recording devices that we talked about this morning, and I'm guessing several folks that are on the call were on that call this morning as well. This is small covert cameras that are placed in a place where they can record a person who is unaware that they're being video recorded. These devices do not record audio, they only record video. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please, Sarah. We use these to obtain information related to criminal investigations. They're disguised and used to record events specifically related to an investigation. These are not left as phishing devices to hope to catch something. They are specifically related to active and ongoing investigations. Go ahead, please. We collect the data related to cases when reasonable suspicion of a crime or criminal activity exists. We can place these cameras, plain view events in areas where no reasonable expectation of privacy exists. That's for the reasonable suspicion situation. When placed in areas where reasonable expectation of privacy does exist, the use of these cameras is pursuant to the Privacy Act and are utilized only after obtaining consent and/or a legal search warrant. And that would ensure that we are operating within the confines of the laws regarding privacy. Go ahead, please. All deployment of these devices are documented by our technology and electronics support unit, and they're subject to audit by our Inspector General and our federal monitor. These devices aren't just floating around. An officer can put them anywhere they want. When an officer or a detective has a specific investigative need for one of these cameras, they apply to the TSU, and the TSU ensures that the warrant requirement has been met and that the privacy requirements have been met, and then they issue the device, they track the usage of the device, and then they pull the information, which we'll get to in a moment. All the information must be gathered and recorded in a manner that is consistent with SPD policy 6.060, such that it does not reasonably infringe upon individual rights, liberties, and freedoms secured by the Constitution of the United States and of the state of Washington, including, among others, the freedom of speech, press, association, and assembly, liberty of conscience, the exercise of religion, and the right to petition the government for redress of grievances or violate an individual's right to privacy. For those reading along with me, I apologize for reading verbatim, but I want to make sure that anybody who has called in is getting this information as well. Go ahead to the next slide, please. There's a list of related policies here, and these are available on the online slide deck, but they include the Privacy Act, State Privacy Act, the State Public Records Act, the WAC, the RCW, the CFR, and various SPD policies that govern the collection, storage, and use of technology and data related to investigations. Go ahead. That's it for cameras, and I'm sure there'll be questions when we get to the end here, but we'll get through the rest of these so we can have plenty of time for your questions and hopefully get you some answers as well. Tracking devices, these are GPS devices. These are geolocation tracking devices that are cellular devices, and by that we mean they use a cellular connection as a tool to locate and track the movements and locations of vehicles. These trackers are location tracking devices that report latitude and longitude, as well as other device information, such as high temperature alerts, device removal, power shutdown alerts, and battery level. Go ahead. Why do we use these technologies? The primary benefit of these tracking systems is in the gathering of evidence used in the resolution of criminal investigations. Proper gathering of location evidence of criminal activity by the police supports SPD's mission to prevent crime, enforce the law, and support quality public safety. Trackers allow SPD to remotely track vehicles electronically. They also allow SPD to locate vehicles and individuals that are sought in connection with an active investigation. And this is important. They are only used with the consent of a witness, a confidential informant, or within the scope of a judicially issued search warrant. So these are once again subject to the requirements of either a warrant or the consent of the party who is utilizing it. Go ahead. For the data collection side of this, tracking devices are only utilized with express consent or search warrant authority. These devices report latitude and longitude coordinates on a predetermined schedule that can be adjusted by users remotely. In other words, they report at certain amounts of time. So some could be set to report every 5 seconds, others could be set to report every hour or every 5 minutes or whatever it might be as needed for the investigation and subject to this to the scope of the warrant that's issued by the judge. The data collected from the tracking devices is provided to the requesting officer or the detective for the inclusion in the investigative file and is stored following our evidence guidelines. So it becomes a permanent part of the investigative file. Go ahead. The protections for the usage of these devices. Much like the cameras, these are documented by the Technology and Electronic Support Unit, and they're subject to audit by the OIG. They are, once again, these aren't devices that are just out and about for everybody. The units that the TSU controls them and issues them when needed. All information must be gathered and recorded in a manner that is consistent with policy 6.060, such that it does not reasonably infringe upon, quote, individual rights, liberties, and freedoms secured by the Constitution of the United States and of the state of Washington, including, among others, the freedom of speech, press, association, and assembly, liberty of conscience, the exercise of religion, and the right to petition the government for redress of grievances or violate an individual's right to privacy, end quote. Go ahead. The list of related policies is very similar to the camera. We have the Washington Privacy Act, the Public Records Act, the Washington State Retention Schedule for records undocumented, Seattle Municipal Code 14-12, and various SPD policies relating to the use of this technology. Go ahead. The next technology we're dealing with is ROVs, which stands for remotely operated vehicles. ROVs are unarmed, remote-controlled vehicles utilized by Seattle Police SWAT, arson and bomb, and harbor units to access areas that are potentially dangerous for personnel to physically enter. All SPD ROVs are controlled by SPD employees operating handheld controllers from a safe position nearby. Some ROVs operated by SPD have a remotely controlled arm capable of performing simple tasks safely from a remote location. Go ahead. The use of ROVs allows tactical units to assess potentially dangerous situations from a safe position. By entering an environment with the additional information obtained using remote cameras or having rendered safe a suspicious package, SPD personnel and community members are both safer. The harbor unit utilizes the ROV to perform necessary underwater search and recovery functions that would not be possible with manned diving alone. These robots are able to go under our control into places where we can't safely go. Go ahead. The data collection. No image or data are stored or retained by the ROVs used by SWAT or arson and bomb units. Harbor unit ROVs store video and sonar imagery captured during each deployment of the unit. Only images directly related to the specific search and recovery are manually exported from the harbor ROV's onboard hard drive if requested by SPD detectives for follow-up investigation. Go ahead. There is no legal standard or condition for the use of these ROVs in non-protected public areas, such as hotel hallways or public waterways. However, if the use of the ROV is to occur inside a protected area, such as in a person's home or property, absent exigent circumstances or consent, a signed warrant is obtained from a judge prior to using it within those areas. Go ahead. And the related policies. The Washington Privacy Act, the Public Records Act, the WAC, RCW, the 8 CFR, and various SPD policies, including 5001 and 5002, standards and duties and responsibilities of employees. Go ahead. GeoTime. GeoTime is a geospatial analysis software that allows visual analysis of events over time. utilizing geodata such as latitude and longitude, procured during criminal investigations. Investigators use GeoTime to create specialized 2- and 3-dimensional maps of calls recorded and cell site locations. These maps allow investigators to see patterns in the existing data that might not be interpreted through other methods. One thing I want to point out where it mentions cell site locations, this does not imply that we are simply just combing and getting cell data. Once again, it refers to the point where it says information procured during a criminal investigation. So there are other methods that are used to get that information. Those are all governed by the privacy laws and warrants and other issues. The maps that are created allow investigators to see a pattern or see patterns in existing data that might not be interpreted through other methods. So it allows them to visualize the development of the intelligence and the information we have over a period of time. Go ahead. Visualizing criminal information provides investigators a more thorough understanding of complicated criminal investigations. GeoTime reduces the time and effort required of investigators to analyze large amounts of data, which translates into a better and more efficient work product. Go ahead. GeoTime does not collect information or data. It is a tool used to aggregate and analyze data manually input by investigators and exports complex geospatial maps which users save into locally stored investigation files. No information is stored inside the GeoTime tool. Go ahead. GeoTime is only used during the investigation of crimes by the SPD. There has to be an open, active investigation to utilize this technology. All the use of GeoTime must also comply with Policy 12.050, the Criminal Justice Information Systems, and may only be used for legitimate criminal investigative purposes. The use of GeoTime is also governed by the City of Seattle Intelligence Ordinance, 28 CFR Part 23, CJIS requirements, and any future applicable requirements. Go ahead. And the list of related policies once again includes the Privacy Act, the Public Records Act, the WAC, the RCW, 8 CFR Part 20, and the applicable SPD policies related to the use of this technology. Go ahead. Computer, cell phone, and mobile device extraction tools. These are used to pull private information from the devices of individuals. They literally extract data from computers, cell phones, and mobile devices. The different extraction tools SPD utilizes for mobile devices work similarly to one another. A mobile device is physically connected to a computer workstation with specially locally installed software, or to a standalone device with a similar software installed. The software is able to bypass, decipher, or disable the device's PIN/password and extract files containing data from the mobile device. Go ahead. Why do we use it? We utilize electronic device extraction and imaging technologies to recover digital information or data from computers, cell phones, and mobile devices as part of criminal investigations. These technologies are utilized only with the device owner's consent or pursuant to search warrant authority. This is not something that we just get a phone and plug in a phone. This is used very specifically either with the owner's consent or with a warrant. The extraction tools allow investigators to legally collect evidentiary information for ongoing investigations that may be used to prosecute crimes. These tools allow investigators to extract data quickly and securely from a wide variety of devices and preserve evidence from these devices in forensically sound conditions, which can then be presented in court. Go ahead. The data extraction devices are utilized only after legal standards of consent or court-issued warrant have been met. Extraction tools from mobile devices, excluding computer imaging, collect information from electronic devices, including contact lists, call logs, short messaging services, or SMS, and multimedia messaging service, MMS, messages, and GPS locations. Computer imaging collects an entire image of a computer's hard drive at a specific point in time. Data collected from the extractions is provided to the requesting officer or detective for inclusion in the investigation file and is stored following evidence guidelines. Go ahead. All devices, this is for the protections, all device utilization is documented and subject to audit by the Office of the Inspector General and the Federal Monitor at any time. All information must be gathered and recorded in a manner that is consistent with SPD policy 6.060, such that it does not reasonably infringe upon individual rights, liberties, and freedoms secured by the Constitution of the United States and of the State of Washington, including, among others, the freedom of speech, press, association, and assembly, liberty of conscience, the exercise of religion, and the right to petition the government for redress of grievances or violate an individual's right to privacy. Go ahead. The usual list of related policies include the Washington Privacy Act, the Public Records Act, the WAC, the RCW, 8 CFR, and the various SPD policies that govern the use of these technologies. Go ahead. Crash data retrieval. The crash data retrieval tools are an important technology used to aid investigators in the reconstruction of traffic collisions. Nearly all passenger vehicles sold in the US since 2013 have an onboard event data recorder, which automatically records important technical information during a critical event, such as a collision. These EDR units only record information when certain events occur, such as when airbags deploy or when sensors detect a collision and do not have interfaces which display the information. These tools allow investigators to download and view this information. Go ahead. SPD utilizes CDR crash data retrieval tools in the reconstruction of traffic collisions. These tools allow investigators access to information recorded by vehicles around the time of critical events that are associated with the vehicle collision. The CDR technology utilized by SPD is required to download and view any data by the EDR units, recorded by the EDR units, excuse me. Go ahead. The data collection. CDR tools collect information stored in the vehicle EDR units. These tools are utilized only after legal standards of consent and/or court-issued warrants have been met in the investigation of a traffic collision. SPD uses CDR tools when it investigates collisions involving specific circumstances, such as the death of any person, life-threatening injuries, hit-and-run collisions, collisions involving substantial bodily injury, where it appears the driver was negligent or under the influence of alcohol and/or other drugs, vehicular homicide, felony eluding, felony DUI, and other vehicular crimes. Go ahead. The protections. CDR tools are utilized only after the legal standards of consent and/or court-issued warrant have been met, as required by Washington Privacy Act, Chapter 9.73 RCW. Use of CDR tools is constrained to the conditions stipulated by consent and/or court order, which provides the legal authority and scope of the collection. All uses of CDR tools are documented and subject to audit by the Office of the Inspector General and the Federal Monitor at any time. Go ahead. And once again, we have the list here of all of the related policies, which include the Washington Privacy Act, the Washington Public Records Act, the Washington Administrative Code, the RCW, 8 CFR, and the various SPD policies that govern the use of this technology. I believe that's it. Go ahead. Yes. So I know I went through a lot of that very quickly. I want to give a little caveat here. I tried very hard, especially after this morning's meeting. I tried very hard to bring subject matter experts in each of these technologies with me. Unfortunately, they were unavailable today. I will be working with them to answer any questions that I am unable to answer today. And I'm also going to work to try to have them with me at the next public engagement session on these technologies, which I believe is coming up in May. But at this point, I'll turn it back over to Sarah for any questions that we have coming in.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Jim. Okay, so feel free to put any questions or comments in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand. I see we do have one hand raised, so I'm going to do my best to do this. It looks like we've got Cynthia with a question.
WebEx Assistant is enabled to save audio highlights.
Hi, sorry, I was waiting for it to like stop talking at me about the thing. So my first question is regarding GeoTime, and just so that nothing is ambiguous, I'm also just going to post the same thing into the Q&A. But which GeoTime products does SPD use? Is that GeoTime Desktop, GeoTime Glimpse, GeoTime Enterprise, and or GeoTime Live?
I will get that answer for you. I am not a direct user of GeoTime, so I apologize for not having an answer for you today, but I will get the answer for which version we use.
Thank you.
All right, we've got some more questions.
I am being told, Cynthia, by an SPD worker that's also on the call with us here, that we believe that it's GeoTime desktop, but I will confirm that.
All right, looks like we've got some more hands. Jennifer.
Hi, could you share how often GeoTime is deployed? For example, how many times a week it's deployed and for how many investigations a week?
My understanding is that it's very rare, but I will get those numbers for you. My understanding is it's not a terribly commonly used tool, and very few people on the department, maybe less than 5, actually have access to it. I'll double check that as well, though.
All right, we've got Cynthia.
So does SPD use the social media analysis functionality that GeoTime provides? And if so, what measures are used to protect non-targeted people that might be included in that social media data, such as people who may have liked or commented on a video or picture from a person and that might be incorporated somehow into this GeoTime utility?
We do not use it.
Will the SIR state that?
I'll double check, but I do believe that it's in there, but I'll double check.
Okay, thank you.
I realize I should be muting again. I might be causing some of the feedback, so apologies for that. I do believe we have Jennifer. I'm trying to request unmute. Am I doing that?
Hi.
There you go.
About that. Could you share for the MDFTs what vendors provide SPD the extraction tools and how many extraction tools SPD currently owns?
That was for the self extraction tool, this computer and cell phone extraction tools.
The mobile device extraction tools.
Yes, let me look that up. I'll have to get the numbers for you after the call, but I believe there are 2 different ones we are using. I'll double check and make sure that that's something the department wishes to release. I have to check with our legal to make sure that that's something that's not protected for operational requirements.
Thank you.
Hi, so regarding GeoTime, item 2.3 in the SIR mentions that SPD investigators can access GeoTime from licensed workstations or through an online internet accessible portal. Is this portal hosted by SPD or is it hosted by Uncharted Software, the providers of GeoTime? And is this portal truly internet accessible, or did the SIR mean that it's only accessible within the SPD network? This basically arrives at the question finally of, do any non-SPD employees have access to this portal? Is that why this portal is used?
Okay, I'm trying to look up that information for you right now. My understanding of your question is who hosts the portal? And the portal is hosted by the company, by GeoTime. It's a public portal.
Oh, okay. Doesn't that change a good section of the SIR then? Is it if the public can access it?
No, it's a publicly hosted portal. You still have to have the access permissions to get in.
Okay, so I see. So you're saying it's internet accessible, but you need to have like SPD, authentication in order to get into it effectively.
That's correct. And our data is not hosted on their site. It's simply an access to the tool through the portal.
But you'd still upload data to it though, right? In order to use GeoTime.
Again, I'll have to double
Like you have
check
to
with
operate on
the
data.
expert, the SMEs on that one. I apologize for not having that answer in front of me. I've also got some folks
Okay.
getting me some information while we're talking here as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, looks like Jennifer.
Could you share what measures are in place to verify the accuracy of GeoTime's analysis? And if you could also share if there's any training that personnel receive on GeoTime, including hours of training, what's covered in the training, and if there are any specific types of training.
Certainly, I'll have to wrap up the training information when I get a chance to touch base with the subject matter expert. Again, I'll hope to have them on the call with me next time, but I'll also make sure I get the answer to that question. As for the validation of the information gathered by GeoTime, that is all, it's our information that is just simply being displayed within the geospatial analysis software. So it's not pulling in different data or different information from other places. It's information that is ours as a part of our investigative file that is then being displayed in a 4-dimensional environment.
Okay, Cynthia.
I think my question is similar, but I don't think that to Jen's, but I'm not sure that the answer given kind of addresses the concern. So the item 6.5 in this, it doesn't really talk about the accuracy of the data that is inputted by SPD into GeoTime. So indeed, like GeoTime's not the one collecting it, but for example, if there was a software bug in a cell tower resulting in inaccurate timestamps or duplication or missing records, then the call detail records, which are then inputted by SPD into GeoTime, would have inaccuracies. And if SPD basically assumes that all sources of their data that they then input into GeoTime are always perfectly functioning and never inaccurate, then this could potentially result in the wrong individuals being implicated in a crime through the use of GeoTime kind of analyzing that, like displaying it visually to you. So is this correct then that like basically SPD does indeed just expect that there's no validate, that they don't do any validations and that they expect all the sources to be perfectly accurate?
No, the investigation itself is the validation. The accuracy of cell site data is completely irrelevant to the existence of GeoTime. We would need to validate that information independently as part of the overall investigation. GeoTime simply creates maps that include a time functionality to it. But the accuracy of the information that's being put in there is independently verified by the investigator through the process of investigation. Much like any other information, such as witness statements or other information that's gathered during investigations.
Okay. Is GeoTime used from the prosecution side as evidence, or it would not be because you would say the call data record is the evidence?
Well, because it's subject to discovery, it's the data, the map that is created by GeoTime is included in the investigative file, which is subject to discovery in court. But the data points that are included in it are also part of the investigation file, and the process of validating the accuracy of those data points is also part of the investigative file.
I see.
All right, we've got Jennifer.
Going back to the mobile device extraction tools, could you describe what kinds of investigations these tools are used for besides sexual assault and child abuse investigations? Or could you describe the range?
Well, the sexual assault and child abuse are definitely two of the high points, the high utilizers of that. We also have our Internet Crimes Against Children group that would be utilizing that. But any investigation that would benefit from the gathering of information in a cell phone could be a user of that. Now, that being said, these devices are not scattered throughout every single investigative unit. It's only the units that use them the most, which would be our Internet Crimes Against Children and our sexual assault child abuse unit detectives are the ones that actually have the devices. But any investigation that would benefit from the information inside a device that needs to be extracted would be able to apply for a warrant and then request the help of the detective who is able to use that device.
Okay. Looks like we've got Cynthia's hand up.
Hi. Yes, continuing about the mobile device extraction tools, do either SPD's SAU, or use what might be called white glove type services from the digital forensic tool providers that entails either physically handing the device over to the tool provider or providing an image of the device's storage to the tool provider?
I will have to ask that question.
Thank you.
Right. Jennifer's got a question up next.
In the SIR, it's stated that if no data is collected by the device that assists in the pursuit of the criminal investigation or falls within the scope of the consent form and/or court order warrant, the device is purged in its entirety and no data is provided to the requesting officer or detective for the investigation file. Could you clarify under what circumstances would no data be collected, and could you share how often that happens?
No data collected. Now, if I recall, what you just quoted from the SR said, no data is collected that is relevant to the investigation or within the scope of the consent or warrant. Is that correct?
Yes. That's in section 4.2.
Sure. I'll double check and see if I can get a determination of how percentage-wise, how frequently that occurs during the use of this technology. But I could imagine a situation where the detective develops probable cause and obtains a warrant to search a phone, only to find that prior to securing the phone to serve the warrant, that it's been wiped clean of any of the information that was relevant to the investigation. So that would be a situation I could see where no data is collected during the extraction that would be relevant to the investigation. So I could see that being a case, very, very broadly like that could occur.
All right. Cynthia?
Yeah, so regarding the mobile device extraction tools, given that in 2017, SPD handed a phone over to the King County Sheriff's Office to do a chip-off extraction, and in 2018, SPD gave a phone to the King County Sheriff's Office to decipher a PIN, and in 2019, had the King County Sheriff's Office attempt to alter a phone's operating system to disable the password. When these kinds of events occur, do those entail the King County detective working out of the SPD facilities, or are the phones physically given to King County?
I can't speak with any confidence to any of the investigations you just referenced. I'm sorry.
All right. Looks like Jennifer's got a question.
Could you share what safeguards are specifically in place to protect data from unauthorized access? And is there a way for SPD to provide an audit trail?
I'm sorry, regarding which technology?
Oh, sorry. The mobile device extraction tools.
And which data are you talking about?
Just any data collected with this tool from unauthorized access. This is regarding 4.1. 4.10.
So unauthorized access, I'm trying to make sure that I answer your question correctly. Any information we gather off the phone that is relevant to the investigation is handled the same as any other evidence. So there is a chain of custody and an evidentiary process that governs the use of that. Other information that is gathered that is irrelevant to the case, if there's no other information that's relevant to it, it's deleted off the device. I'm not sure. You're asking for what audits exist for that?
Yeah, just what is the data protected, and what sort of audit mechanisms are there? And if there's any sort of safeguards like encryption or access control mechanisms, etc.
I'll double check on that.
Okay. Cynthia.
Does GeoTime interface with PredPol, CrimeView, or any other predictive policing technology used by SPD?
No.
Is that something that would be added to the SIR to state that they don't interface that?
Well, I think we need to be careful about making sure we don't require the SIR to list everything it doesn't interface with. The SIR requires us to talk about how we use it, and what it does interface with. I think we need to be careful about starting to require a list of everything it doesn't, because we'll be here until the end of time. So we can look into that, but I don't think it's going to be a tenable option here.
Apologies if I muted prematurely. I was trying to control the feedback by muting Cynthia during the response. Okay, it looks like we've got Jennifer.
Could you share when an officer or detective requests use of the data extraction tool, does that officer or detective need to articulate something that they're specifically looking for? I guess also I'm asking what would constitute probable cause, or can they request the use of the tool just hoping they're able to find something?
No, it's all subject to the requirements set in a warrant. So they have to convince a judge that they have probable cause to believe that evidence of the crime they are investigating exists within the device that they are trying to extract from. And it's up to the judge to determine if the detective or officer's probable cause is accurate and appropriate. That's why we use the warrant process.
All right. Cynthia.
Is there any policy defining the incident types for which SPD may use GeoTime? Something that specify that it needs to be serious or violent offenses or some level that's warranting the use of the tool as opposed to less serious offenses like trespassing or graffiti or other petty crimes.
Well, that's governed by the fact that we just don't have the time to apply a tool like this to what we would consider a lower level offense.
Jennifer. Oh. Your hand might have gone down. Not seeing any hands at the moment. Thank you for putting some of these questions also in the chat. This is great. Oh, okay, Cynthia, thank you.
This is a similar question to the one about GeoTime is whether or not, in this case either, there's any SPD policy defining the incident types that you can use the mobile device extraction tools for, or would you be permitted to use these, for instance, on like someone associated with like civil unrest and protesting, but not affiliated or suspected in any of the serious crimes, like not a homicide and those kinds of things?
Well, we would need to make sure we comply with the intelligence ordinance as it relates to people's right to free assembly and the laws related to that. But we would also need to convince the judge that we have probable cause that that evidence exists of a crime within that device. So the policy wouldn't necessarily say you can't use it for this type of crime or that type of crime, but civil unrest is not something where we would just throw it in there unless we were investigating a crime and had probable cause that we could present to a judge in the warrant process.
Thank you. Okay. Jennifer.
Regarding the remotely operated vehicles, could you share whether the SWAT or the arson bomb unit have any remotely operated vehicles with surveillance cameras? And if so, how many? And are there any other recording capabilities? And in addition to that, could you share what constitutes an exigent circumstance that would justify the use of a remotely operated vehicle in a protected private area without a signed warrant from a judge?
Certainly. Firstly, the ROVs operated by arson and bomb and SWAT have cameras on them that are used for situational awareness for the operator of the ROV. That way they can see where the ROV is and what the ROV is doing. Those devices do not record, and the non-recording cameras upon those devices were a part of their own surveillance impact report separately to this. So they don't record and they don't create a surveillance requirement because they do not record. As for use without a warrant, that would be anything that fits within the exigency exception to the warrant within the law. So a safety issue that requires us to get inside somewhere that is safer to use a robot than it is to use a person.
Great, thank you. Do you see? Oh man, I didn't see which one was first. Jennifer.
Sorry, I'm taking notes. The other person can go before me.
Okay.
Am I muted now?
No, sorry, I accidentally hit you with the double click.
Okay, okay. As long as you can hear me now. So the GeoTime server mentions like the roles of people that can conduct audits of SPD's use of GeoTime. I was wondering like when was the last audit of SPD's GeoTime conducted, and is that a audit report something that's publicly available?
If I recall, it lists the Inspector General as the auditing body for that. Is that correct?
It lists multiple. There's I had to go back to see the exact wording. Inspector General is one of them. It also mentions the Federal Monitor, and I think there was 3 entities. I can't remember the third entity that they listed.
APRS is probably the third. That's an internal SPD group that I would be able to answer for, and I can get the answer for that. For the other 2, I would need to refer you to the Monitor and the OIG, who are independent of SPD.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jennifer?
This question is regarding the tracking devices, and could you share if there are any other agencies or law enforcement agencies specifically outside of Washington State that use this technology?
I don't know, honestly. I'd have to refer you to those other agencies. There's just too many. But I can tell you that tracking devices are a relatively common tool in law enforcement, but as to what agencies use them, I couldn't tell you.
Okay, and I have another question about the tracking devices. Could you share if there's something SPD is doing to ensure that these devices are not being used disproportionately in investigations of certain groups such as Black people and people of color?
Well, that would be a part of the equity metrics that I have no doubt the City Council will require as part of the approval of these SIRs.
Wonderful, thank you. Right, Cynthia's got her hand up.
So it's known from trying to ascertain through public access whatever contract would have between GeoTime or Uncharted Software and SPD that it's not contractual. Like there's a software license and like terms of service you'd agree to for that. It's not a separate contract. But we know from that the details from the Public Record Act's request that there's 2 floating licenses that SPD has to GeoTime, at least as of I think it was like 2019 or something. So I'm assuming those two floating licenses mean that any two workstations could use it. So I was wondering how many people, can anybody then who, is it everyone who's in the TSU who could access it? And like how many people are we talking about?
Well, without knowing much about the actual use of the technology itself, and I apologize for that, my understanding is that you have to have an independent login per user. And so with the two software licenses at two separate stations, I'll have to get an answer on how many people actually have independent logins for that, and I will get that answer.
Great. Looks like Jennifer's got her hand up. Oh, this is not the right button. Let's try that.
With the tracking devices, could you share the name of the vendor?
I'm sorry, similar to what we did related to the cameras and the audio recording devices. If we shared the name, the make and models of the vendors of the devices we use, it would allow people to develop countermeasures to work against them. And so we're not going to be sharing those at this time.
All right. Cynthia?
I'll lose track where I was. The answer to 3.2 in the SIR states that the data analyzed using GeoTime is obtained via warrants. Does this mean that both no private information without a warrant nor any public data is ever added to GeoTime?
I will have to double check that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Jennifer?
Could you share how much, when data, this is regarding the mobile device extraction tools. Once the data has been extracted from the device using this tool, could you share how much of that data is typically stored on the extraction device before it's downloaded to the investigation file? Is it immediate? Is deletion of data on the extraction device also immediate?
I'm double checking on that right now. I guess it would depend on how quickly it can be extracted to wherever it's going, to wherever it's being stored. It would also depend on the size and nature of the data that's being pulled. I imagine that pulling text messages off a single cell phone is significantly smaller than copying an entire hard drive off of the computer. So it would depend on the size of the files.
So to clarify, the only limitation that would not lead to the immediate deletion of data on the extraction devices, it's just the time it would take for that to happen.
And the time it would take to review the data that was extracted to ensure that it is not associated with the crime that's being committed or that's being investigated.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Cynthia?
For the mobile device extraction tools, once the extracted files or data are saved, which groups of SPD employees have access to those files? Do SPD employees not directly involved with the case have access to the files? And I'm meaning that if someone deals with, I'm not sure how SPD segments their workforce, but if you have officers who are mainly focused on I don't know, like robberies or like stolen cars, and that kind of stuff. Those would be one kind of incident you might have data for, compared to somebody that deals with assault and homicide, abductions. So I'm wondering, once the data is pulled off of the mobile devices, do all SPD employees have access to that, or is that still somehow segmented?
No, not all SPD employees have access to it. It's subject to the security related to all of our evidence policies. So when it's submitted to evidence, whether digitally or physically, a person has to have a reason and association with the investigation of that case to clear it out of the storage unit to review it.
Ooh, I'll try to be quicker on the reverb there. Okay.
If I'm being too loud, please let me know as well. I'm trying
No,
not to
I
shout.
think it's just the like multiple mics being on at the same
Okay.
time. It caused a little bit of, yeah. Okay, Jennifer?
This is regarding the camera systems. Could you share in general, where are the kinds of places that these cameras are covertly placed? For example, are they mostly placed in urban areas, rural or residential areas, or intersections? And could you also share how long they're typically deployed for, as well as how sophisticated the fixed location cameras are? Like, can they zoom, pan, pivot, transmit video in real time, etc.?
For the last question, it would greatly depend on the device itself, and I'm not familiar enough with these devices to speak with confidence to that, but I'll work on getting an answer for you for that. As for where they're deployed and for how long, both of those are subject to the needs of whatever investigation are using it and the scope of the warrant that is obtained with the approval of the judge. So as for where they're typically deployed, there is no typically. They're deployed wherever the investigation takes the process.
Cynthia.
Okay. How many, regarding the mobile device extraction tools, how many people have access to the mobile device extraction tools, and how often are they used?
Again, I'll need to get the answer to that, as I do the same about the number of devices we have. So I'll put that in as part of that answer as well.
Thank you.
Okay, Jennifer.
This question is regarding the mobile device extraction tools. And I apologize if you've already clarified this, but could you share what the process of obtaining consent from the phone owner looks like? So is a person provided an opportunity to consult with an attorney before they make a decision? Is there a script that officers and detectives follow? And if so, could you share, briefly what that script might say? And what information is the phone owner provided about how their data will be extracted, and what data? Are they informed verbally and in writing that the extraction tool will extract a full copy of their data from their phone? And is a consent process different for non-English speakers? And if so, how is it different?
Okay, for the last question there, because you asked several, so I'm going to hope to hit all your points. And Jennifer, please don't mute, because I want to make sure I get through all your points before we mute you here. So please stay with me on this one. For the first one, the process, the only difference between the process for an English-speaking and non-English-speaking person would be the involvement of an interpreter. Beyond that, there would be no difference. We ensure that is the process. As for the process of gaining consent, they are welcome to consult anybody they want. Consent is voluntary, and so there is no timeline required associated with it. If I ask a person if they're willing to do it and they say, I'd rather consult an attorney first, then that's entirely up to them. We don't pressure consent. The other piece is the farrier warnings that are given to a person related to authorizing a search. They're allowed to express limits on the nature of the search. They're also allowed to, at any time, decline the search during the process. So if they change their mind halfway through, just like searching anything else, they have the opportunity to limit the scope and decline it at any time. There is a script related to farrier. Whether it's read during this, I'll have to double check, and whether there's whether there's a form associated with a script, I'll have to double check on that as well. Did I leave any of your questions unanswered in that process?
That was pretty thorough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just double checking. I think that covers it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Right, Cynthia is up.
Regarding the mobile device forensic tools, what percentage of devices that are extracted through consent or warrant are owned or are primarily used by people under the age of 18?
Well, that is quite a specific question. I'll definitely need to try and see if I can obtain that answer. I can't say for sure that I know that I'm going to be able to do that, but I will dig in to see if I can find the answer to that.
All right. Jennifer?
Could you share, is it data obtained via extraction tools subject to the PRA?
In what way?
If it's accessible to the public via the Public Records Act?
I'll have to double check. I'm going to guess that a fair amount of that information is subject to the privacy and evidence policies related to it, but I'll double check on PRIA as it relates to the extracted data. I imagine it would depend on the nature of the data itself.
A few more hands here. Cynthia?
So this is a similar question when I asked for GeoTime, but this time about mobile device forensic tools. I'm wondering for the mobile device forensic tools, when was the last audit of those conducted, and if that audit report is public?
And unfortunately, I'm going to give you the same answer I did last time, which I know is maddeningly vague. For the two agencies that aren't SPD, you would need to inquire with them. If APRS is listed, I'll have to check and see if we have an audit record with them as well.
Okay. Jennifer?
This is a question regarding GeoTime, and the SIR states that the public may express concern over the consolidation of so much information about individuals, but all of that data is input into GeoTime is already available to investigators. Given the consolidation of vast amounts of data, which are essentially locally stored investigation files, what safeguards or measures are in place to protect the data in those files? For example, is the data encrypted? What are the control access mechanisms?
Are you speaking about the source files, like where they're stored and how they've secured there?
The source files, but also any analysis that's conducted using that information.
It's the electronic evidence policies that relates to how we secure all of our data.
Okay. Cynthia?
Does GeoTime log what actions each user take and stuff like the application?
I'll have to double check and see if it actually has a direct audit log like that, but I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
I feel like we need a water break. All right. Let's see, Jennifer.
This is regarding GeoTime again. Because GeoTime allows for the mapping of data that are not related to the person under investigation, it enables SPD to cast a pretty broad net that could ensnare innocent people, exposing their private information. Could you share what sort of safeguards and protections SPD puts in place to protect the information of, people who are not actually under investigation?
Well, as it relates to any other investigation, the safeguards, I know you mentioned expose. It's not exposing it to anybody that didn't already have access to that information. It's all still contained internally within SPD. And to ensure that they're not improperly accused, the investigative process determines their involvement and dismisses them out of the investigation if appropriate. So there is no additional exposure in the use of GeoTime because it all stays secured within SPD.
Cynthia?
I also have a GeoTime question. It actually goes back to the line of questions I had about the portal versus the licensed stations. Are the software level security controls like authentication, authorization, logging, etc., the same for both the GeoTime workstations and the portal? And what ensures that those security controls are indeed the same? And how many SPD's employees have access to the portal?
The last question is the same as the previous question. I'll work on getting an answer to that. As for how the workstation security compares to the portal security, I'll double check and get an answer on that. And if it's, I don't know if it's just me, but Cynthia, I believe your microphone may be cutting in and out. Hopefully it's just me and everyone else can hear you perfectly clearly.
No, yeah, it's happening for me too.
Okay.
Maybe next, maybe I'll try to.
Cynthia, if at any point it appears that I misunderstood your question, please don't hesitate to ask it again. But I'm doing my best to get what you're saying when you speak.
Yeah, and Cynthia's also putting her questions in the Q&A as well in text format. So
then any question I don't answer today, we'll make sure to get an answer to prior to the next engagement session.
Great.
This is Megan. I just want to jump in and say we're about 15 minutes away from the end of this meeting. So if there's any last questions, let's go ahead and either get them in the document or in the Q&A section, or please raise your hand and Sarah will unmute you and call on you. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Good time check. Any hands?
If it looks like we, oh, sorry, Cynthia, you're quicker than me. So I'll let Sarah unmute you.
I will. Here we go.
I disconnected my headset. I don't know if this is bad or better. For GeoTime, the answer to item 8.1 in the GeoTime server only covered PII requests. The answer to 6.1 listed 6 other entities that could receive data from GeoTime, along with 2 other groups being researchers and federal state entities. So does SPD record all of those disclosures as well, or only PRA-related disclosures?
That one was really rough. I tried to mute Captain Britt to see if that would help. I don't think it did.
Cynthia, I think you were asking about disclosures as it relates to PRIA requests versus other requests. I may need to defer you to our public disclosure unit for the answer to that question, but please put that question in writing in the chat, and I'll see if I can get an answer for you on that one as well.
Yes, perfect. It is in the chat.
Thank you.
Jennifer.
Just a question generally. Could we email you with follow-up questions as they come up prior to the next engagement meeting? Would that be helpful?
I believe there's a link provided within this profile or within this venue to email the questions there, and they're going to be compiled and put together because we want to make sure that we can put the similar questions together or the same questions together. We're not answering them 4 or 5 times, but I believe there's a link within this process. Sarah and Megan, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, I believe you are referring to the very beginning of this deck where I give you guys whiplash really quickly. I apologize.
And Jennifer, while she's
That's
looking
fine.
that up, yeah, there it is. Or no, that's for the city council. My apologies.
Yeah, there is
Jennifer, the
an
sooner those
SPD
questions are in, the more I'll be able to get those answered prior to the next engagement session. But I believe it's at the very end, Sarah. Don't quote me on that though.
Okay, it could be. Let's see.
I'll look out for it.
Yeah, and we'll be taking the questions that we, oops, whoa, it went away. The questions that we need follow up on. We'll be generating and compiling a list both from the Q&A and from the video recording as well, as Jim mentioned. So it may be at the end.
Jennifer, the next to last slide mentions visiting the Group 4B Technologies survey to submit comments and questions about these technologies. And the folks over at the IT privacy office will make sure that those get over to me.
Yep.
Right there. There we go.
All right. Looks like Cynthia has a question about where the answers will be posted. That's great. That's a great question. We could compile them and, as Jim mentioned, make them available prior to the next event. We could potentially put them on our public-facing website and make them available. We'll have to see what's most accessible, Cynthia, option to get those out. Pardon me.
About 10 minutes left. So if there's any more questions, we can move through those, or we can give everyone some time back. We will work to figure out the best place to put these questions that need to be responded to written, and we can we'll share that out. You can find the information on the seattle.gov/tech blog, and it will either have the questions posted there, or we will provide where we're going to put the questions there.
I do want to take a moment to thank everybody that attended today. I do actually believe that it is very important that the police department be able to answer the questions from the people that we protect and serve. I know that sounds a little pie in the sky, but I do honestly believe that we are accountable to you, we are responsible to you, and we need to be able to answer honestly the questions that we can answer. And so I will be doing my best to answer these questions prior to the next engagement, the public engagement session, and we will make sure that we're able to post these the answers that I can provide in a place where you can get to them. But I wanted to thank everybody who came today. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you also, Captain Britt, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here and talk about this with us. We do have, I'm just putting a note in the Q&A because there are a lot of good questions, some asked verbally along the way, but this is a nice record of detail for some of them too. So I will just make a note in here for folks who maybe haven't watched been able to attend or watching the recording that will work to provide answers to any of these unanswered questions. All right, I'm not seeing any other hands. So maybe we will give a few minutes back. Thank you all so very much for joining us. Hope you can join us for the next one, which I believe is slated for, keep me honest here, May 20th. Is that correct? I believe that is correct.
I'm double checking, but I don't believe that's right. I think it's May 11th.
Oh, could be.
Nope, sorry, that's the council. The next meeting for the other group 4A. Let me double check. There it is, group 4B, May 18th.
May 18th.
4:30.
Great, perfect. Same time, different day, same place. We will see you back here, and thank you guys so much for attending. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye all.